Hello, and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in business and in life and simplify them. And it is a new year, it's a new day, and there are some things that I really want us to simplify in the year ahead. So we've been focusing a lot about writing in the month of January, and this carries that thread a little bit further, but then really interjecting how to communicate compelling, captivate an audience when you get in front of a room to speak again, whether it's on Zoom or one day in person, or deliver a sales presentation, or even, hey, a keynote speech. There are some key critical skills that you need to help you write that compelling keynote speech to really drive the message home. So I had to find the right expert to simplify this very topic, and his name is Robbie Crabtree. He's worked as an attorney on over 100 high-profile cases, along with teaching persuasive speaking at the Southern Methodist University Law School here in Texas. He also coaches students to compete nationally in speaking competitions every single semester. He's worked with leaders at Apple, Google, Microsoft, Reddit, and more to develop their speaking abilities as well. He's the founder of Performative Speaking, which was recently acquired by On Deck and is now the program director for the On Deck Performative Speaking Fellowship. So I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast, Robbie Crabtree. Hey, Robbie, how's it going?
Hey, Mary, thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited about talking about this today.
Yeah, and I really want to go in more advanced levels. So we had Michael Gelb on in season 3, December of 2020, talking about, how to become an excellent public speaker. And I think that was really great because it laid down the foundation of things to know. But I want to go deeper into this. But let's start off with the why. Why, in your opinion, do you think it's important to sharpen your skills as a compelling communicator? I mean, especially now, in a pandemic, in 2021, new inauguration, all things. Go.
We see the power of words,
Yeah.
right? In every area of life, we see the power of our words. And in fact, one of the reasons I call my teaching performative speaking is the word performativity actually means the ability for words to bring about change. And that's really what I believe. So when we talk about great communication, whether it's the written word or the spoken word, it has the power to impact people, to move them, and to really change the world.
Yeah.
And that is why I am so incredibly passionate about this and want to help people better their communication skills so they have the ability to do that and the ability to articulate what they want to in a clear, concise, and compelling way.
Well, and I mean, the concept of communicating storytelling as an essence is not a new concept. I mean, people have been doing it since caveman periods, making paintings on walls and then learning languages and telling stories around the fire, right? But why do you think now, especially, it's so important? If you're a business owner and you haven't brushed up these skills, why could that be a detriment to you?
So now the issue isn't getting your story out there or trying to have your idea found.
Yeah.
The problem is there's so many ideas out there. It's about cutting through the noise. And we're coming from a place where it used to be hard to get traction. You're trying to get PR. You're trying to get your idea just out to the world. But now with the internet, with social media, with our phones, it's everywhere. Yeah. And it's almost you're spoiled for choices. So what does that mean you need to do as a business owner? That means you need to have such a compelling and strong story that it resonates with your audience and cuts through all of that noise. Think about your Apples. Think about your Nikes. When you see that ad come on, oftentimes they're not even really advertising the product. They're advertising their story.
Yeah.
And they're making you connect to that story. And that's what drives great businesses now and lets them cut through that noise and really send up that bat signal to attract the right customers and the right people to that brand and to that vision.
And for anyone that's listening with a little bit of a critical ear going, yeah, but Nike and Coca-Cola and all those guys have huge marketing budgets. I'm willing to bet that what you're telling here doesn't require thousands and millions of dollars to get that message across, right?
Not at all. A great story will cut through.
Yeah.
No matter how big your budget is. It could be no budget. It's one of the things I love about the current space we're in. And in fact, one of my kind of favorite people I've met recently is David Perel, who runs a course called Rite of Passage. And he is very fond of saying that writing is this great serendipity vehicle where people can find your work. But really, what connects them to that work is when you tell a great story and you can put it out there for free and have people come to you and find you and say, have you read this story or have you heard this story that somebody delivered on YouTube? I mean, we've all seen those viral stories where they just take off and all of a sudden tens of thousands of people have seen something without having spent a dime. And that's the power of a great story because it connects to us on a human level. There's this human psychology basically tells us when we hear a great story that we remember it and we learn these lessons. There's a reason why the Iliad and the Odyssey have made it through, thousands of years in oral tradition, then being written down, and they're still studied even today because it's interesting and entertaining, but also teaches a really powerful lesson throughout that entire story.
And what you said earlier reminded me. I mean, I started my business in 2003. Before social media, and it was not that long ago. Social media only came around, 2008, I think, 2009 for most people. So prior to that, small business owners were knocking on doors, putting flyers in people's mailboxes, going to networking events, putting ads in magazines to spread their story, spread the word of what their products and services are. But now we have these so many tools at our fingertips, even new apps like Clubhouse popping up where you can get connected immediately to people in these rooms. And as you say, the noise is insane. And so I think we as humans, we're stripped back in so many ways, even though we do have so many channels that we perceive that we can get that message out. So yeah, I'm right on board with you of cultivating those skills as a communicator is critically important so that you know what to say, who you're saying it to, and when, right?
Yeah, exactly. You bring up Clubhouse, and I was on Clubhouse last night in a room where people were pitching their ideas to Jason Calacanis.
Yeah.
Except most of the pitches were really dry and didn't go anywhere because there was no story behind it. Yeah. And I actually put out a tweet today saying when you pitch your idea or your product or your vision, you really need to have these kind of 3 Ps. And you need to have this purpose, this potential, and this passion. And if you do that, the easiest way to identify all of those is actually to wrap it up in your story, in the story of you as a founder, in the story of you as a company or a vision or an idea. Yeah. That's how you're able to tie all those together and make it really memorable and powerful where we as a human latch onto it and say, I'm interested, tell me more.
And that's it. It's a simple invitation in. I think we forget that with our social media posts or whatever that we're putting out there, it's always the buy my stuff, click here now, do this thing right here. And it's people are being beat across the face with, sales ploys. And that's where we start to go numb. That's where we turn it off. That's where it does become actual noise. So I'm kind of curious then, kind of looking back at your career, what have you learned as an attorney in all of these high profile cases that really helped you actually become a better public speaker and a communicator?
So I learned people make decisions based on emotion. And it's one of those really hard truths that we have to just grapple with because we want to think that we're logical and are making decisions based on reason, when in fact, we're using logic and reason to essentially justify the emotional response that we had. And I'll never forget, this happened in a case that I was trying where I had the facts, I had the evidence. There was no doubt that I should have won the case, but the jury came back not guilty. And I heard them talking to the defendant outside afterwards. And they told him, look, we know you were guilty of this. We know that you feel sorry though, and we're going to give you another chance. Just don't do it again. And that was really this moment where I saw facts, evidence, logic aren't what drive people. It's the emotional connection. So that was really this turning moment in my life as a lawyer where I was like, I've got to figure out how to make this emotional pitch to my audience while still using that logic and reason to back it up so that they're justified in coming to the conclusion that I'm asking them to come to.
Yeah. And I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. And I guess it's worth pointing out at this point, it's not about manipulating people's emotions. It's not about pushing them into something that they don't want and or need or can afford, right? It's something just the opposite, right?
Exactly. So it's really about using emotion in a ethical way.
Yeah.
And realizing that there is something that drives people. And when we're pushing for like a sales pitch, if you're thinking of it that way, when we're talking about, a lot of times we feel like it's manipulation when it's salesy. But what should really be driving your thinking is, can I provide value to this person? Is what I'm offering going to help them, get them further in life, do good for them?
Yeah.
And if it is, if you can answer yes to that question, then we need to be able to create that emotional pull on that person so they will actually take that action and get that value that we can provide. But if we have value to provide and we aren't making this emotional pull on them, they're missing out on that value. And so now they've missed out on it. We've missed out on the ability to help somebody and also help ourselves at the same time. So it's really about first having an ethical reason why you want to sell something or get somebody to make a decision, and then using that framework to say, okay, now we're going to go to the emotional pull and get them to see the value and make that decision.
Yeah, I mean, as you were saying that, it made me immediately think of any sort of late night online shopping regrets I've ever had, where you bought something, say, on Amazon from some random clothing provider in God knows what country somewhere in the world. And it looks so like, oh, this is beautiful. It's a great price. I can get it in, a couple of days. Brilliant. And then you order. And then you get it a couple of days later, and it's like 5 sizes too small or completely wrong. You know, if you are doing any sort of those tactics where you're communicating a keynote speech or delivering a sales presentation and selling the wrong thing to the wrong person at the wrong time, there's nothing but buyer's remorse that comes from it. And then writing poor reviews and then referring, people to your competitors. Like it's a no-win situation, right?
Yeah, it really destroys your brand credibility.
Yeah.
And that brand being both like a business brand, but also your personal brand. And I think in today's day and age, especially, we need to be more aware of guarding our personal brand than we ever have been. Because that is, in my opinion, that is the best story you can tell, is your personal brand story. Who am I as a person? Why should you connect with me? What can I offer you? And the reason I love storytelling and why I'm so passionate about this idea is because that storytelling actually lets us demonstrate the value that we can bring to somebody else by telling our own story, by delivering it to them in a very impactful way. So it really achieves multiple goals because storytelling allows us to prove our credibility, but also prove our likability at the same time. And if you're giving a keynote address, what better chance to demonstrate those two things than in that environment?
And, I think about the products and services that we offer currently. So I do business coaching above and beyond the podcast. So a lot of those services or packages are built off of hard-earned lessons learned over, the last 5, 7, 10 years of the business. And I think a lot of times our customers are somewhere 5 years behind where I'm at currently. So they're looking for a leg up or just a simplified framework for things. So I think that's critical in kind of understanding as you kind of develop your talk or your key takeaways, right? I want to move and shift gears. So talk to us about your performative speaking framework. You mentioned a lot about creating your go-to story. What's that first?
Yeah, so a go-to story is, I think, the one story every person should have. And it's that story that you can just pull out time and time and time again. And it just demonstrates who you are as a person, what you believe, something that is really valuable to your audience. And it always delivers. It always leaves people wanting more, excited to hear from you. It's one of those stories that when one friend hears it, the next time you're with that friend and you're with other friends, they're saying, hey, tell everybody else this story because it's that good. It's almost like this idea of, we've all been there on Netflix when we're scrolling through and we think we're going to find a new show or a new movie to watch. And we scroll and we scroll and we scroll. And ultimately we come back and we say, you know what, I'm going to watch The Office for the 10th time. Because we like it so much. We're comfortable with it. It's really entertaining. The same is true for a go-to story. And I think it's something that so many times you ask people to say at a networking event or at a dinner party or even in a work environment, like to tell you a story, and they struggle to even find one to deliver. And I think you should always have that go-to story ready to roll at any moment.
And, my thoughts on this too, Robbie, correct me if I'm wrong, if this is the same in your life. You got to get out there and live, in order to have stories. You can't be stuck in front of your laptop 8, 10, 12 hours a day. You have to get out in the world and live and do your thing and meet people, and even stories outside of your work and the challenges you maybe overcame can feed in, right?
So I love that because there's kind of like a 4-piece framework that I use for a go-to story. And the first piece of that is adventure.
Yeah.
When we tell a great story, people want to be put into an adventure. It's exciting. It's something that will immediately hook them into your story. So when you're saying you've got to go out and live life, couldn't agree more. Now, here's the beautiful thing, though, about a go-to story is when I say adventure, it could be like a wild trip across, the world. You went to India and you have some crazy story about going to see the Taj Mahal, right?
Yeah.
Or it could be something as simple as you had a kid and you were leaving them with the babysitter and going out for your first date night. And the adventure is just leaving your child behind with a babysitter. And then you tell the story of this first date night out and all of the interactions that go on. So the adventure doesn't have to be huge, but it certainly can be. I love doing a lot of big trips or big moments in my life and using that as my adventure. Then our next pieces to this are the second point, the second piece of this framework is there needs to be some adversity. And this will be important because the third piece is triumph. And what that allows you to do, when I was talking earlier about stories letting you show credibility and likability, that adversity piece allows us to show we overcame it, that life hasn't just been perfect for us, that we see difficulties in life and we overcome them. That's where that triumph comes in. That's how you all of a sudden become very credible and likable. And then the last piece that I love, and this is sometimes a little bit harder for people, but it's humor. If you can spread in some humor into your go-to story, that is what just is that last little bit of magic sauce. It's kind of like the whipped cream on top of the pumpkin pie, right? Where pumpkin pie is delicious, with a little bit of good whipped cream, it's even better.
You're speaking my language right now. So just to recap what you just said, 4 stages of telling a good story is adventure, adversity, triumph, and humor. So are there anything else that we should really think about when telling a good story or creating our go-to story?
So that framework is really the 4 pieces of a go-to story. But any great story really has 5 ingredients. So this will be a little bit of a different framework, but it fits within the go-to story.
Yeah.
And this is kind of how we talk about it, how we develop it. So many people, when they start writing their story, they have a really hard time because they see a blank piece of paper. Where do I start? Well, here's where you start. You need to first identify your characters. And this means not just saying my friend. You need to give your friend a name. You need to give them identifiers. You need to make sure that you really paint a picture of who that person is.
Yeah.
The second thing is in line with those characters is relationships. We need to know how they are connected to one another. That's always important. So if it's my sister, that's not super helpful because I have 2 sisters. So I may need to say my older sister or my younger sister, so we can start to build that actual relationship so the audience can keep it straight in their head. The third piece is going to be the environment. Your audience needs to see, feel, taste, hear where the action's taking place.
Yeah.
Then these next 2 pieces will be similar to what you heard in the go-to story, but they're slightly different. You always want to have some sort of conflict, and that's just some sort of thing that needs to be resolved. And then your last one is some sort of resolution. Yeah. Now, resolution in this case is a little bit different than triumph because resolution just means ending your story. So many stories end where people essentially do this. They're telling their story, and then they go, so, and they just trail off.
Yeah.
And you're like, hold on,
Yeah.
that's not the way you end.
Yeah.
I like to think of it like if you go to the symphony and you're listening to the orchestra play, when they finish, it is dead silent. Everybody stops on a dime. Instruments are up, and you know that song, that piece is over. And then the crowd jumps up to their feet, erupts in applause, and gives a standing ovation. That's what you want in your story, and that's what that resolution is really sticking the landing.
I love it. And I can totally visualize it in my mind. And I would encourage anybody that's listening right now, go ahead and hit pause, like right this second. Do it. And think about just 5 minutes or 7 minutes, set a timer, and jot down, well, what could be your go-to story? What key moments in your career or in your life would be a compelling go-to story? And think about those 5 ingredients that Robbie just mentioned. I love that. Okay, so assuming bonus points, somebody has pressed the unpause button and they're back. Well done, you. If you didn't do it, go pause again. Let's talk about captivating your audience, like really digging deep into this. Like, how do you create emotion in your keynote speech or in your next talk?
Yeah, so the way I actually love to do this is I find emotional inspiration sources from outside. I like to find external sources. So the way I go about this is I think, what am I trying to achieve in my talk? What do I want my audience to feel? Once I do that, then I start thinking internally, when have I felt that? Now, when I am able to identify that, and maybe it's a movie scene, a television scene, maybe it was a piece of art I saw, maybe it was a dining experience I had, I want to go and find that inspiration source, and I want to start to reverse engineer. What about that made me feel this way? So maybe it was the type of music that was being played in the background of the scene. Maybe it was a contemporary art piece where it was just like so interesting and confusing at the same time that I had this like really deep sense of intrigue of like trying to figure out what's going on. So I use these external sources to reverse engineer when I'm creating a keynote speech so that I can translate that emotion I understand and give it to my audience. And what you'll actually find is so many people when they're speaking struggle with confidence. They just feel very nervous when they're delivering a talk. But by using this internal feeling and emotion that you know so well, you are actually an expert. So you can speak from a place of expertise because really what you're trying to recreate is not subject matter expertise as much as emotional expertise, which you have felt and understand on a really deep level and makes you an expert in that topic.
So let's break that down into a very specific example. I'm just throwing off the cuff here. Maybe your go-to story is this time where you tripped over your sneakers and you busted it real big in front of some very important people. Are you talking about how you felt in that moment, how you felt in that recovery afterwards? Is that where you're saying?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, that would be what I'm trying to recreate. And this is actually when we're talking about stories. I love the book by Tim O'Brien. It's called The Things They Carried. And I don't know if you haven't read it, it's about the Vietnam War. And in that book, he essentially amplifies everything that happens to these soldiers, where when you're reading it, it's so obvious that it's over the top and not actually what happened. But Tim O'Brien talks a lot about this idea of emotional truth. And it's the only way for the audience when they're reading it to feel the same way that those soldiers felt in Vietnam is to go over the top because that's how it felt to them in the moment.
Yeah.
The same can be true when you're delivering your go-to story. The example I love to use is, let's say I was terrified by dogs. Now I'm not, but let's just use that as an example. And let's say I was being chased by a dog and it was a 30-pound little fluffy dog that's never going to hurt me, but I still was terrified.
Yeah.
Well, when I tell that story, it's not going to make a ton of sense if I tell them I was terrified of this 30-pound dog. So maybe we just change it a little bit to create emotional truth. And that would be something as simple as, I couldn't tell you how big the dog was, but I just saw its teeth were bearing down at me, and I was sure those fangs were going to stick into my neck and it was all going to be over. Maybe that's not exactly what an outsider would have seen it as, but that's how you felt in the moment. So when you're creating that story, we need to make sure our audience feels the emotion that we felt, because that ultimately allows them to take part in our story with us.
It's so good. And, as you were mentioning that, I've met some very small dogs who are very ferocious. Let's just, for the record. But no, I was just thinking, these principles really could apply if this is the year that you submit a TEDx talk. This is, could be used if you've been invited to speak on a webinar or an online conference in the year ahead. There's so much to this that you may be thinking or sitting back there going, well, yeah, but online or live events have kind of disappeared. When will I ever use this? In fact, you potentially could use it in every single day. It doesn't even require a giant stage and production sound system and all the things, right?
Yeah, in fact, these are great ways to connect, especially in this current world we live in where we're having to do it over Zoom or over Skype or on webinar. Like, we want people to feel who we are as a person, because we're essentially disconnected by this screen. And what better way than sharing our go-to story and sharing those emotions we felt and helping somebody on the other side of the screen, who maybe is on the other side of the world, feel an experience with us, so that we actually create this real human connection, so that we can have this deeper, meaningful relationship with each other. And so I think it's more important now than ever, because in a lot of ways it's easier to do this sort of thing in person. People are generally more open and willing to listen to you in person. So we've got to make sure we're more intentional with the way we approach communication in the current day and age.
Yeah. And also outside of your work, let's say you're single and you do online dating or anything like that. I can imagine that these principles apply there too, if not more, right?
I mean, absolutely. I think during the introduction, in fact, like, you were talking about my course getting acquired, and like, I'd never met with the company or the people who just acquired my program and my startup. Like, we did everything. Right. It was all over Zoom. It was all on the phone, which means like I've got to find a way to communicate effectively in those negotiations without ever having, like, this wasn't a situation where I got to go and have dinner with them and wine and dine and all this. No, it's just Zoom calls. Yeah. So, and dating the same way, or building friendships like this, there's never been a better time to build meaningful connections through the internet than there is right now, because people are just desperate for real connection. And so you can really use these skills in every part of your life to just connect, whether it's at work or with a potential significant other, or just building new friendships. Like, that's the type of thing that these stories and this ability to speak really clearly and write really beautifully all play a role.
Yeah. And I find for myself as a public speaker, I used to be incredibly shy as a child, huge. I would much rather sit in a closet and play by myself. And that's more than plenty. Thanks, To be where I am now, part of the secret is repetition. It's practice. It's actually putting yourself out there, being vulnerable, flubbing it up about 10,000 times, and then, starting to build that confidence within. Is there anything else you would suggest to people who are like, ooh, I don't know about putting myself on video and telling my story like that in a public way?
So I love a specific exercise to help people get over this, and I call it fear setting. And what you do is you just, on your own, you turn on the camera and you're going to describe your very worst fear when it comes to speaking. And I mean, describe it in detail. How you feel, exactly what goes wrong, what you're wearing, who's watching, everything about it. And then what the key is you watch it back. And by watching it back, what you've now done is you have identified the very worst case, because more often than not, that real fear of public speaking comes from the unknown. We don't know what that worst case is. So once we identify it, first off, now we've dealt with this unknown. The second thing that we've now done by doing this fear setting exercise is we've now set our floor for the very worst case. Well, if we know what the very worst case is, we can work to improve that and make sure it never happens. So you've automatically raised your floor just by doing this exercise.
Mm.
And so then you start to see this, and most of the time, in my experience, people I work with, they tell me afterwards, they're like, that was so ridiculous. I can't believe I thought that could even happen. Like that would never happen. So it really helps people gain confidence. Like you said, some of it too, you just got to get out there and put in some reps.
Yep.
But you can do that. You can record yourself on video. You can record yourself on audio on your phone. Just start getting more and more comfortable listening to your voice, controlling your pacing, and being more intentional in the way you design the way that you're speaking.
It's huge. And it reminds me that I think one of the things that a lot of people fear when it comes to public speaking is how the other side, how the audience is going to respond to what I'm saying. Are they going to reject, or am I going to look like an idiot, or am I not going to remember all the lines and all the things and all the stuff? That sometimes you can just start with yourself, like audience of one, right? You never have to publish the video. You never have to put it out on Facebook Live, right? You can work your way up to that too, huh?
Absolutely. So you don't have to put stuff out there right away. And there's kind of two pieces. One is this idea of building in public too. I think we're in a really cool spot in kind of like our society right now, where building in public is very in. Yeah. And in a lot of ways, you can start by being very raw and having some of these flaws, and people are going to get to actually watch your journey as you improve.
True.
And they find motivation in that because maybe they feel the same way as you, but you get to kind of lead them and show them it's safe. And what you'll find is a lot of people actually supporting you in that journey, wanting you to be successful. And the other thing I'll say along those lines is there's a quote that I love by Harvey Specter from the show Suits. And I have to love Suits because, after all, I was a trial lawyer for a very long time. But it's this line about confidence is not that they will like me. Confidence is that I'll be fine even if they don't. And I think that that's so true, where it really comes down to it's about ourselves internally and being okay with who we are and realizing, yes, when I talk, I want my audience to be moved. I want them to do what I'm asking them. But at the end of the day, confidence isn't that they like me necessarily. Confidence is that I like myself. And as long as I like myself, I'm good. I can continue to move on in the world every single day.
So a couple of quick fire questions on this, because I want to make sure that people are taking it away and have some real definitive homework if they want to really put this into practice. First off, how long should a go-to story be? 3, 5, 10 minutes? Does it matter?
So your go-to story should be one that you can both compress and expand. Okay. You should be able to give more details when you're in that situation. Now, I like to aim for a tight 3 minutes if you can. Mm-hmm. And it should be something that if your audience is loving it and you have more time, you can just kind of keep building it where it becomes 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, because you're going so much into detail. But that's just really a read on your audience. But for the main part, I think 3 minutes, because most people will give you 3 minutes to tell a story. Mm-hmm. They're never going to be like, oh, it should have been shorter than that. So that would be where I would start, is design a 3-minute go-to story using that 4-piece framework.
Great. And then I realized, as you were saying, and you said it somewhere in the middle, about, this is not a place where you're like, and I'm a brilliant business coach, and here's why, ... Like it's here's a story of something that happened to me, and, the adversity that I overcame, and triumph, and just a little bit of humor sprinkled in. So you are able to, brag about yourself, right? As you say. So without necessarily bragging. Tell me more.
It's literally being able to brag about yourself without bragging about yourself.
Yeah.
And what you're essentially showing, in an easy way to do it too, is if you're a coach or you're working with individuals, part of your go-to story can be the success of a client.
Exactly.
So it doesn't feel like you're even talking about yourself. You're talking about this client who came into you, and the adversity was they were facing this issue at work. They were having a hard time because they had a boss who kept cutting them off in the middle of their pitches because they were going too long. So you were able to work with them, and through that time, you started to develop what was going wrong. Why was this being an issue? And they all of a sudden one day told you, Robbie or Mary, I get it now. I understand what's going on. I can remove this stuff, and that's okay. Yeah. And then a week, a month, 2 months later, you got a text message from them saying it was a game changer. I can't believe how great it went today. That old boss who used to cut me off, all he could say today was, that was one of the best presentations I've ever seen. Right? Now you've told this story And it's a go-to story of yours, but it's about your client. So you're bragging without bragging, because really what you're doing is talking about your client who saw success. And so
Yes.
that's what I love to do if you're trying to use it more in a business setting.
100%. I couldn't drop the mic. It's done right now, Robbie, because I think it's true. Sometimes we think or we perceive, especially when you hear like the word personal branding, it's all about me. Put the spotlight on me and how great I am, and I'm going to tell the world about me, and then everything, the money will just keep flowing in, right? And the truth really is that you're the guide for your clients. You're the Yoda to the Luke Skywalkers out in the world traversing things. Right? So it is a lot about you guiding them and the triumphs they have as well, too.
The clients or the customers, the people you're working with, they're the hero.
Yeah.
Your job is to let them be the hero and shine that spotlight on them.
Yeah.
And if you're able to tell your story in a way that does that, that shows the success other people are having by working with you, that is actually much more powerful for somebody to say, I want to work with Mary because I want to be one of those customer success stories. I want her telling my story in years. I want people hearing about all of the great things I've done because Mary basically put that light on me and guided me down that path. And like you said, served as the Yoda to the Luke.
Yeah. And it all comes back for me is resonance that I see myself in the story, resonance that I see the work that you're doing in the world. I guess the last point I want to ask is call to action. So the whole story is not just like, wow, that was a great story, Robbie, you went skydiving, amazing. But what is it that you're driving them to do next? Talk to us about that.
So your call to action is always, that's part of why you have this triumph, right? And I think if you're talking about just like I went skydiving, that probably isn't like a great go-to story because that's more of just like a personal, like I did something cool type story.
Right.
And there's a time and a place for those stories. But if we're talking a go-to story, there's a reason why that structure is adventure, adversity, triumph, humor.
Yeah.
That adversity and triumph is actually what is allowing you to demonstrate the quality that you have as a person. And by doing that, essentially, you're setting it up where your call to action is, hey, you should ask for more about me, or you should come work with me, or I can help you have these types of stories.
Right.
So your call to action is almost this, you're almost pulling an inception, if you will, where you're kind of planting the seed in their head. And especially if you're telling a story of like a customer or a client success story, you are essentially saying you can be this too. Wouldn't you like that?
Yeah.
And so really your call to action is ask me for more. I love intriguing people. If I can intrigue them, they're going to ask me questions. If they ask me questions, I get more information and can figure out, am I a good fit to actually work with them? Because at the end of the day, I'm not a good fit to work with everybody.
That's right.
I'm not trying to work with everybody. I'm trying to work with people I can help. And so that means my goal in a go-to story is to demonstrate who I am as a person, my credibility, my likability, and then get questions from them to figure out, is this something that makes sense for the two of us to work together? And we go from there.
Yeah. And if you are translating this to a TEDx talk or a pitch to TEDx to speak in the new year ahead, your compelling keynote speech is your one big idea, the thing that you want to express out into the world. And it may not be a direct sales pitch or call to action to work with me, but it may be, wow, okay, I just saw Robbie talk about this. That was incredible. And as you say, it entices me to go back to your website, find out more about the courses or things that you're working on or products and offerings that you've got out in the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly what it's about.
This is a perfect time for me to tell people where your website is. So if you are intrigued by Robbie, go to robbiecrabtree.com. All the links and all the resources that he and I talked about in this episode. By the way, you can find out our show notes at thesimplifierspodcast.com as well. So Robbie, I have a few questions as I wrap up that I like to ask everybody. And again, thank you so much for your time today. It's so great. I feel like my little hamster wheel is whirling right now, giving me some new ideas. And I hope that others are feeling the same way. So tell us, what's one book or blog that you're reading these days that's either inspiring you or poking holes and challenging your belief system?
So Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield. And I actually just wrote an article about this. This is one of the books I read every single year because it is such an inspiring book to me in so many ways. It is fiction and is talking about the Battle of Thermopylae, but it's just a masterclass in storytelling and developing characters. So like, obviously I'm talking a lot about storytelling, and Stephen Pressfield in this book is just incredible. The way he builds characters, the way he plays with structure of time, the way that he builds the relationships. But the other thing too is it is actually a great leadership book as well, because it's talking so much about leadership principles, but through this world of fiction. And to me, it is the absolute best book to realize the power of stories, because they teach us lessons, but they're also entertaining. And so I just absolutely love it. And I'm currently rereading it again for my yearly reread. And I couldn't say more good things about it if I tried.
That's brilliant. Well, we will link that up in the show notes for people. I've not actually read that. And it's nice as a palate cleanser, especially if you're an entrepreneur and you're like knee deep in business books and all sorts of things, to have a fiction book every now and again interjected in there. I think that's a great recommendation. So tell me, who's one person in your network, somebody that you know personally, you just feel is up to brilliant things? We could shine a spotlight on them, and who knows, maybe one day we'll have them on the podcast as well.
So her name is actually Charlotte Crowther, and I've been really fortunate. So she runs a thing called My Snapshot, and what it does is it allows students in online courses to really understand the kind of roadmap of where they're going in a course. It allows them to self-identify their strengths, their weaknesses, and say where they are at the beginning and understand where they want to get to at the end. And then there's a midpoint and an ending point survey as well that goes into this. And she just understands student experience, learning experience, helping people really figure out what is inside of them and bring it externally. And it's just unbelievable how well she knows this stuff. Yeah. And I'm so inspired working with her and talking with her any chance that I get, that I just absolutely love bringing some light to what she's doing.
It's very cool. There's so many geniuses out there when it comes to online learning and thinking about students' like learning journey through courses, masterminds, and all that. I love it. We'll link her up in the show notes if people are curious there as well. So I believe gratitude and simplicity go hand in hand. Tell me, what are you grateful for like today?
I'm grateful given everything that's gone on, just that I haven't had anything terrible happen to me this year, right? I mean, I got COVID in November. My mom got COVID in November. It could have been far worse. We were both okay. And I know a lot of people haven't been, or maybe they had a tough year because their business was affected. And so I'm just grateful that, myself, my family have not really been negatively impacted, because I realize that has not been the case for so many families, so many people out there. And yeah, there's been a lot of, tough things too that come with COVID and the world kind of shutting down, and it hurt my legal practice and all that. But at the end of the day, I think it's just so important to look at the bright sides and what has actually happened and could have happened, and just be really thankful for the fact that I have my health, my family has their health. I've been able to build a really nice business, and just embrace that sense of gratitude for being okay.
Yeah, it's a secret weapon. I'm telling you, people hear about gratitude practices, whether it's journaling or, it's just saying them out loud on your morning walk every morning. And, 90% of people just go, that's silly. That doesn't work. Or I don't have time for that or whatever. But, as I've interjected that into my daily practice as well, it is a game changer, because it changes your mind, it changes your heart, it changes how you look out into the world and see either opportunity or scarcity. It gives you a leveling that is a deep foundation, and I couldn't agree more. So I just want to remind people, if they want to connect with you, they can find you online at your website, robbiecrabtree.com. You're also on Instagram at the Robbie Crab. All of these links in the show notes at thesimplifierspodcast.com. And just a reminder to guys out there, the applications have opened for Robbie's on deck performative speaking. So that is open right now. If you're listening in early to mid January, then this is the time to kind of reach out to him and connect and get more information there. So my last question for you today is this, Robbie. And again, thank you so much for your time. Someone, somewhere, who knows, in the world is listening right now, and she's totally inspired. And she's like, you know what? I do have quite a few stories from 2020 that I would love to share with the world that might actually be time to say it out loud with my outside voice. But she's scared. What's one thing you could whisper into her ear right now just to encourage her in this moment?
It's your story, and the world needs to hear your story, because nobody else can say it like you can, because you're the only person that's lived it. And so you're the only person that can tell it, and the world wants to hear it.
Thanks, Robbie. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Mary. This was great.